Chapter 2, Tools of a Healthy Diet, Screencast 3. This is the last screencast for Chapter 2, and really what we'll be looking at here are a number of different plans out there and programs that are kind of designed to focus on healthy eating. So this is actually a little bit more application. Now, the first thing that this screencast is going to really look at are differences between energy dense versus low dense food types. And I think it's important to distinguish the two. Now, when we look at energy dense, now we're looking at those foods that are high in calories but weigh very little. So a lot of these tend to be foods that aren't great for us. So if we look at cookies, fried foods, snack foods, nuts are kind of an exception to the rule. Nuts have a lot of energy, not a lot of weight, but there's definitely some benefits out there in many of the nuts that are available. Now, probably the most difficult population to work with are those people that are trying to put on weight. Generally, they want to put on muscle mass, not fat weight, so that makes it a lot more difficult. But these are the types of foods that people that have poor appetites or are trying to gain weight should concentrate on. Now, when we look at low energy dense foods, these are going to be foods that have a lot of water and not a lot of calories. So this is where a lot of fruits and vegetables come in. Probably the most famous would be lettuce, and then we have celery. So high water content, maybe get some fiber in there, but really not a lot of energy overall. And if we look at a couple towards the other end, so casseroles, oatmeal, those probably have a little bit more. But these are the types of foods that should be eaten when you're trying to really maintain or keep calorie intake on the low side and potentially weight loss. Now here, I'm not going to go through this whole slide here, but really what it's talking about, giving you an idea of very low, medium energy, and high energy density foods. And like I said, this is not a bad way to go, but if we look at those things that tend to be high energy, for the most part, we're looking at a lot of our snacks, we're looking at some saturated fat, things like that. So really not all that much on the healthy side, whereas we look over here, this is probably where a lot of us should really put the emphasis on, these very low and low energy foods for the most part, in an effort to maintain weight and prevent weight gain. Now we want to look at something known as Dietary Guidelines for Americans. And what this is a government foundation for nutrition policy and education. And their goal overall is to reflect accurate and up-to-date scientific data about nutritious diets, physical activity, and related healthy lifestyle choices. And I've kind of talked about healthy lifestyle choices before, because a lot of the behaviors that we choose to do have some pretty significant consequence on risk for disease. And this is a really good example, because what we want to do is make sure that our food is meeting the nutrient needs, but at the same time, we want to reduce the risk of many of these disorders. If we look at hypertension, cardiovascular disease, obesity, osteoporosis, notice type 2 diabetes, not 1, alcoholism, and foodborne illness. So that's really what the Dietary Guidelines for Americans is putting the emphasis on. So how can we reduce the risk of these? By putting the emphasis on nutritious diets, physical activity, and other healthy lifestyle choices. So this basically comes out on a 5-year plan. So we're kind of towards the tail end of one, so 2015 to 2020. And I'm not going to go through all of these, but if we look at some of these guidelines that they're really shooting for. So follow a healthy eating pattern across the lifespan, focus on variety, nutrient density, and amount, limit calories from added sugars and saturated fats, and reduce sodium intake, shift to healthier food and beverage choices, support healthy eating patterns for all. This has not changed across time. If we really look at things that we know, none of this is rocket science. But if I look at the previous edition of this, they really didn't change a lot. We're just not really good at putting these into practice. Okay, so that I think is kind of important. Now, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about healthy eating pattern components. I think you can take the time and look at that on your own. So that's one component. Here, if we look at the other aspect as far as variety and nutrient density in a healthy eating pattern. And so here we're really looking at guidelines. Real important is to increase the intake of vegetables, fruits, and grains. Kind of limit dairy. When we're talking about protein, really kind of investigate the protein that we're eating and try and shift a little bit more towards plant-based proteins and lean meats. Okay, so Americans aren't very good at that, and also looking at the various type of oils. And once again, the goal here is caloric balance in a healthy eating pattern. And so, as I said before, when we're talking about balance, you want to maintain that neutral balance where energy in equals energy out. And there's going to be no net gain in weight following that particular pattern. Now here, this is kind of a breakdown, and I want to spend some time here. So here we're looking percent of population below recommendation or limit. Here we're looking at percent population at above recommendation or limit. And if we're looking at the orange bars, that's going to be the intake below recommendation or above limit, and the blue is intake at or above. Okay, so that's kind of what we want to look at here. If we look at vegetables, really large percentage below, very little above. So there's a trend here if we look at the problem. So look at fruit, yeah, we're not so good about that. Total grains, a little bit better, okay? Dairy, not really. Protein, tend to a little bit more focus on other types of proteins, oils. If we look at added sugars, that's something that we're consuming too much of, along with saturated fat and sodium. Now, chances are when you complete your diet analysis, you're going to fall along some of these patterns. And so the point of that diet analysis, once again, is to identify what your weaknesses are. So it's an activity that hopefully you're going to get a lot of good information about that you can actually apply right away. Now, here you've probably heard of those books like Instead of That, Eat This, and that's really what we're looking at here. And so a lot of people were brought up on white bread. I was brought up on that. But now when I look at the types of bread that I typically eat on a regular basis, I really have switched over to mostly whole wheat bread. So that's going to more nutrients and also fiber. If we look at sugary breakfast cereals, look at something that's a little bit higher in fiber type cereal and add fresh fruit. Cheeseburger with French fries. Here, instead of the French fries, baked beans, and you're having the hamburger without the cheese. You get the idea, okay? But once again, the overall pattern here is shifting towards foods that are higher in nutrient density and lower in energy density. And those are patterns that are really important that we try to maintain when trying to keep a healthy life pattern. Now, across time, and because I'm old, I've seen all of these. And if I look at probably one of my favorites was the original food pyramid. And if we look at the base, okay, so here we're looking at starches and carbohydrates of a complex nature. Now we're looking at vegetables. Here's some fruits, protein, dairy, and then we're going to see some oils. Makes sense, okay? We got a base of a pyramid, and we kind of work from there. Someone thought that they'd make things a little bit more complicated, and I don't know about you, but I would never slice a pyramid this way. I think it's really confusing. They try to complicate things because now it's an Aztec pyramid. It's got steps for exercise. This should concentrate on food. And we have now evolved into MyPlate. And there's actually the website, so myplate.gov has lots of information related to MyPlate and applying it and those types of things. And kind of notice what the emphasis is. They're using a plate as the standard frame of reference, and we're splitting it across fruits, vegetables, grains, and proteins. So very generic across the board, and then we've got dairy. Okay, so we're not talking about meat anymore. We're talking about protein overall. So I want you to keep those in mind because what we're going to look at next is how can we actually put my plate into action. Now, one of the things that my plate is actually doing is focusing on some key behaviors. So balancing calories is going to be really important. You want to enjoy your food. We're supposed to. Okay, food is very enjoyable, and there's a lot of social aspects related to the food that we eat, but really trying to eat less. Probably one of the biggest things is trying to avoid oversized portions. Now, I get it when we go out to a restaurant, we're spending some money, and we want to make sure that we're getting what we feel to be our money's worth. Okay, I don't go out to eat very often, especially now because of COVID. But when I do, one of the things that I do right off the top when my plate comes, in the beginning, I would actually ask for the to-go box in the beginning, and I would take half, put that in the to-go box, and then I would concentrate on what was left on my plate. Now I kind of ahead of time make a decision, how much am I going to eat? So I'm not going to ask for the doggy bag up front, but I already know how much I'm going to put there. Okay, and that's a really good way to kind of avoid many of these oversized portions that you see in restaurants these days. Now, this is definitely something that I want you to concentrate on, and you're probably going to see some questions as far as what foods should be increased. So half the plate should be fruits and vegetables. At least half of grains should be whole grains, and actually switching as far as dairy goes to fat-free or a lower fat milk. So all of those things are going to have some really benefit impacts on overall nutrition and weight loss versus weight gain. Now, things that we're bad at, and I've alluded to this before, so we should be trying to reduce sodium and choosing those foods that have less sodium in them, and actually shifting towards water instead of sugary drinks. Now, if I had to pick one general behavioral pattern that I have seen people get a lot better at, it's really choosing water. Kind of think about it as you're walking around. If we were in class, chances are we would see a lot of people with water bottles. One of the things that I was really happy about when they replaced the water fountains in my building, they actually added water filters, bottle fillers. So I basically hardly drink. I mean, once I have my cup of coffee or two in the morning, it's pretty much just water the rest of the day. And having those available just makes it really easy to do that. So I think that's an important thing that we do a lot better than we used to. Now, what I want us to kind of take a look at here is what are some My Plate recommendations for daily amounts of food to consume from the food groups based on energy needs. And so across the board, what we see are caloric intakes ranging from 1,000 to 3,200 calories per day. And generally what we're looking at here, across the day, how much of that should be grains, vegetables, fruits, dairy, protein. It's setting some limits for saturated fats and also added sugars. So this is a nice way to kind of gauge. So I want to shoot for 2,000 calories per day. So I should be really focusing on trying to get 6 ounces of grains, okay, 2.5 cups of vegetables, 2 cups of fruits, 2.5 to 3 cups of dairy, and that should be a low fat type. Okay, as far as protein, 5 ounces or the equivalent. And we generally are very pro-protein in our society. And I know when I was a kid, my plate version would be, I want at least a quarter to half the plate made up of meat, and then the rest can be made up of other things. But we're really kind of switching gears from that. Okay, and then trying to minimize the amount of saturated fat. 22 grams is set at the maximum if we're looking at that 2,000 calories per day. And also trying to decrease added sugars, keeping that at a max of 50 grams. And I kind of chose that because that's, once again, that's that daily value. If we look at food labels, they focus on that 2,000 calories. Now here, kind of looking at some way of getting equivalents and 1 ounce serving sizes. So 1 ounce equivalent would be 1 slice of bread, a cup of ready-to-eat breakfast cereal, a half cup of cooked cereal, rice, pasta, or bulgur, 3 cups of popcorn, unsalted of course. If we look at vegetables, So a cup of raw or cooked vegetables. We can look at a cup of vegetable juice. But notice as far as the leafy greens, because of the volume, that's actually going to be up to 2 cups. And you can see the equivalence here, okay? And so I think it's important to kind of get an idea of what that actually means overall. So this is a really good table that kind of helps you get an idea of what some appropriate serving sizes are for the various groups that are out there that we saw on the previous page. So here, 5-ounce equivalents, 6-ounce equivalents, and so on. Okay, that's where we're actually kind of seeing the equivalent over here on this particular table. So really trying to put this stuff into action. Now, one part that's going to be important is having an estimate of the activity that you should be getting on a daily basis. And so there is going to be differences between females versus males, and that is due to the amount of lean mass. When we compare males to females, with males having significantly more lean mass overall. So if we're looking at the sedentary individual, they're probably looking at, if we're talking about a woman 19 to 30 years, that's going to be about 2,000 calories. If we look at a male and the same for sedentary, expending about 2,400 calories a day. As we increase to more active, we're going to see a greater range. And this is important because it gives you an idea, it's an estimate. Okay? But really, we're talking about balance. Okay? If this is what my caloric expenditure is, I now have an estimate of what my intake should be to keep everything in balance. Now, when we're looking at the next few slides, it's all about putting MyPlate into action. So there's some really important statements here that I want us to kind of think about. No specific food is required for good nutrition. There's no perfect food. If we look at variety, moderation, those are going to be really important things to think about overall. There's no food group that's going to provide all the essential nutrients in adequate amounts. Foods within a group may vary widely with respect to nutrients and energy content. If we're looking at trying to keep calories under control, serving size is going to be especially important. And as I kind of noted before, variety is probably one of the most important. If I had to pick the 2 most important principles, variety and moderation. Okay, so I think those play a really important role when we're trying to focus on obtaining a healthy diet or eating plan. Here we're basically looking at the major nutrient contribution of groups in the MyPlate food guide plan. And once again, if I'm looking at grains, these would be the nutrients I'm achieving there. If I look at vegetables and fruits, so really what we're looking at, which of the major nutrients are we getting, what essential vitamins, and that's really kind of giving us an idea based on the general categories that make up MyPlate. What are the overall nutrients that we're going to get from these food choices that come within the groupings from MyPlate? Now, I've talked about some of these before, okay? So grain, make at least half of your grain choices whole grain. That's going to be really important. One of the things that we're looking at vegetables, variety is really important here because remember, vegetables and fruits are rich in phytochemicals. And there's kind of a bright rule. Okay? Those vegetables that are brighter, so peppers, things like that, they tend to be very good sources of a lot of phytochemicals and antioxidants in nature. And fruit falls under the same category. So once again, the thing that's cropping up here pretty regularly is this concept of variety. When we talk about dairy, we should be making choices that are low fat and fat free. Now, protein, this is the hard one, I think, okay? Because it's very easy for most of us to have meat portions that are on the large side. Right? It just is. I don't know why. But kind of think about the average size burger is a 1/4 pound. Okay? You go to a restaurant, they're going to be advertising a burger that's a third of a pound, a half of a pound. That's significantly greater than we're looking at what we should actually be ingesting. Now, oils are necessary. Okay, fat has had in the past the tendency to be demonized, and I've talked a little bit about that, but we're going to go into a lot more detail when we do the chapter that's focused to fats and lipids. Now, remember, oils are not a group, but small amounts of oil are going to be really necessary because we need essential fatty acids. We don't produce enough of them, so we need to get them from our diet. And one thing that I really have kind of talked about quite a bit are empty calorie foods. So those are things that we really should try to minimize overall. Now, these are some things that kind of give you an idea of how to work out portion sizes. So here, if we look about a golf ball, okay, that's generally about 2 tablespoons of a salad dressing, peanut butter, things that are spreadable. Tennis ball, we're kind of looking at baked potato, okay, a small piece, small or medium-sized fruit, ground or chopped food, a bagel or an English muffin. A deck of cards is the exact size that we kind of should keep in mind when we're looking at a 3-ounce portion of meat, poultry, or fish. That's the recommended size that we're kind of looking at overall. And then a baseball, now we're looking at larger type fruit or a cup of ready-to-eat breakfast cereal. So there's other resources out there that you can kind of take a look at to help you kind of get a guesstimate of what typical portion sizes are. But this is also going to be important when you start working on your diet analysis, because one of the things that you're looking to do that's important is making sure that you record the portion sizes as accurately as possible, because that's going to impact your overall results. So being able to get a good estimate on portion sizes. Here, this is really putting my plate into practice, and how many servings from each food group does this meal provide? So it's just kind of a breakdown. If we look at the overall food here, it's a pretty healthy approach for the most part. And generally, if we look at what this all breaks down to, so we can actually see what's being accomplished. So with this breakfast of an orange, some granola, with some cranberries, fat-free milk, and optional coffee or tea, those generally are considered to be calorie-free for the most part. You look at what you're getting. You got your fruits, your grains, fruits, and dairy, and the variety across the day to try to achieve a full My Plate. And overall, the breakdown of this, it worked out to about 1,800 calories. Okay, so that's under 2,000. 56% of the calories were coming from carbohydrates, 18% protein, and 26% from fat. Pretty much falls well within the AMDR for these energy yielding nutrients. So really good idea of a good sample diet plan that will work. Now here, basically kind of giving you an idea across the age span, the different types of vegetables for the most part. And so we're breaking these vegetables down for the most part as far as dark green, orange, and we're also including here beans, peas, we've got starchy vegetables and other vegetables. And this is a way of kind of breaking them down. And these are recommendations per week, okay, not per day. Because once again, you're trying to make sure that you have these in your diet on a regular basis and you actually have the variety. So once again, there's some really good guidelines of general places to start and how to actually start using My Plate a little bit more effectively.